Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Marvel's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4. This is the PlayStation 4 exclusive game that's going to be coming out on the 7th of September. So today I went to a PlayStation event where I got to play this game for the very first time. And very much like I did for God of War, I would like to share with you guys my initial impressions of the gameplay section that I played. And to get things started, we're going to be talking about the visuals and sound. Now, when it comes to Marvel's Spider-Man, I think that the visuals are looking really good, but they didn't necessarily blow me away, because ultimately we are living in a post-Horizon Zero Dawn and God of War era, which those games definitely blew me away from a visual standpoint, whereas Marvel's Spider-Man can definitely, keep up with those visuals. It's not really blowing past them all that hard, at least in my personal opinion. However, having said that, like I said, the visuals are still really good, but more importantly, the animation work that is being made on this game is far above and beyond a lot of games that we currently have in the genre, which is extremely important, especially for the sections where you're just web slinging with Spidey, or even during the combat, because one of the things that I think defines Spider-Man as a character is how agile he is, how able he is to move around and dodge attacks and land punches just through sheer agility. And I feel that the animators just did a fantastic work conveying all of that into the character itself. It is super responsive. There's tons of contextual animation, whether it is when you're slinging around or when you're landing punches or when you're throwing an enemy and juggling him in the air with the middle of a combo, or you're performing like a special takedown on enemies. It's just like everything in terms of animation is top notch. I was completely blown away by how good the animation work was on this game, especially as you are playing it, because you can see a video and you can be like, oh yeah, that animation looks pretty good, but as you are experiencing it through actual gameplay and you're inputting controls and you're seeing the response times on the character actually performing the commands and how reactive those commands are and how just like the action that you want the character to take and the actual that actually happens in game, it just like it all is super tight. Again, my personal opinion of what I've experienced so far in this early version of the game. So that is just like, that's what impressed me the most, was definitely the animations. I cannot emphasize that enough. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is the cinematics. There's a couple of cinematics throughout the game. Those cinematics were pretty good. In those cinematics, we naturally have some voice acting. The voice acting is also solid. The animation in all of those cutscenes was also, again, above and beyond what I was expecting. Just like, when you get those animations of Spidey coming down on his web, like upside down and just like facing an enemy upside down, those kind of things are really, really well done, in my opinion. While we're talking about voice acting, I feel it is important because to a lot of people, Spider-Man is naturally this superhero that is kind of like always a little bit cocky, and he's always got the trash talk while he's engaging with his enemies, and he's always going like, oh yeah, I'm so good, and now I'm gonna beat you, and like this and like that. And, that kind of attitude, he's got all of that into his character as you are fighting with bad guys. He's constantly throwing down his usual Spidey banter, and it is really well done.
They always look so cozy whipped up like that.
The sound effects and all of that are also really solid. The Spider-Man punches landing. The sound of the webs coming out from the devices that he has on his hands, the web slinger, all of those sounds are super solid as well. As you are shooting webs out of it, is just like, again, sound really, really good. And interestingly enough, the music, which I hadn't really heard any of the music associated with this game so far, really reminded me of the Avengers theme, which is natural because Spider-Man is now a part of Marvel and all of that stuff. So it really reminded me, just like as I was going through and doing some of the missions, you were hearing the same sound that you would get out of the Avengers, like dun 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 dun. that kind of stuff. And that was really cool. And I thought that really played well into the game as we're going through the gameplay. But anyways, now that we talked about visuals and sound, let's talk about what really matters, shall we? Let's get into some gameplay. And I think that one of the first things that people are going to want to know about is the web slinging. So we're going to be talking about navigation a little bit here. And first of all, web slinging, and I'm sure that people have talked about this because the game was playable at E3 and a lot of people played it at E3. The web slinging is awesome and extremely intuitive. Basically, you press R2 and he shoots a web that actually attaches to like a building or something, some kind of geometry that is actually in the game. If there's no geometry for Spidey to throw a web at, he's not going to be able to actually web sling in that location. So you're going to have to find other means of navigation. So if you keep R2 pressed, it's almost like a parkour mode, or I think it's actually called a parkour mode in game. So basically you keep R2 pressed, you're web slinging, you go up against the building, you start running up the building, you do wall runs if you're going like in a certain direction and you enter the wall at an angle. You can wall run, you can turn around while you're wall running and start running up the building. And at any point in time, you can basically stop. So say if you're walking up a building and you stop, he's going to assume the usual Spidey crawl position, and you can crawl around for a little bit if you want to navigate with a little bit more control. But at any point, you can press R2 again and you will start climbing up a building. If you're at ground level, you can press R2 for Spidey to start running. You can start running up a building. If you are, however, at ground level and you press R2, he's not going to start immediately web slinging because the game doesn't know if you want to web sling or if you just want to run around. So it's going to default to you running, and then if you want to web sling, all you got to do is press X once in order for him to jump, and once he jumps, he will start web slinging instantly. So the web slinging mechanics as a navigational mechanic is super well integrated, as well as all of Spidey's climbing abilities, being able to run through walls, whether sideways, upways, downwards, like however you want. All of that stuff works fine. Now, when you are web slinging, you can also use X when you are mid-air to kind of propel yourself forward. He kind of shoots some webs and propels himself a little bit more forward. I believe that there will be skills on a skill tree that will allow you to improve this movement to make it go faster or something like that, but I didn't get too deep into that stuff. Another thing is that whenever you are web slinging throughout the world, something that you can do is you can also press down R2 and L2 at the same time, and he's basically going to shoot down two webs simultaneously. He's going to propel himself to a position and he's going to stay there. So say, for instance, you're navigating throughout the city and you're like, oh, I got to stop here. You can instantly press R2 and L2 and Spider will just like shoot two webs, propel himself towards that position and stop. So it's very easy for you to stop. It's not like, oh, I got to keep slinging around. It's like, oh, I missed my stop. Now I got to go all the way around. No, it's super easy, super intuitive, and I found it very, very nice and very pleasing even. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that in the B-roll that PlayStation sent me, you can actually do like acrobatics while you're web slinging. I was not aware that you could do that, so I didn't even try any of that stuff out. But apparently you can do acrobatics and you'll gain like experience points for doing acrobatics while you are navigating through the world, if that's something that you'd like to do. So that is pretty cool. So in terms of navigation, web slinging on the outside, all of that is solid. Now, it is important to mention that when you are on the inside of buildings, which will happen on certain missions, naturally, you know, the world, it is an open world, but you're not just walking around on the outside. You will be navigating certain missions inside of buildings and stuff. When you're inside, you can't do the same traversal that you do on the outside with the web slinging because, you know, it wouldn't make sense. You're inside a building. What are you going to do? Start swinging around? So there are other ways to navigate. You can still run, you can run up walls, you can still jump, and you can also use the propel mechanic that I talked about using L2 and R2 to kind of like propel yourself upwards. You can use this to navigate to vents, and there's a lot of really good camera work to showcase what is happening throughout the game whenever you are doing certain moves, like propelling yourself to a vent, and the camera will actually shift focus so that you can see Spidey go into the vent, and the camera angle will also shift to represent that you're inside a vent, so you can't just have the, you know, the distance that you would have on the outside. So basically, again, even though you can't do the web slinging that you do on the outside, you know, it still feels very intuitive. So now we're going to be talking about combat, and I just wanted to bring something that is very, very important to me, and that is naturally the difficulty. Now, since I was playing a demo and I had a limited amount of time to play, I decided that, you know, I'm just going to go with normal difficulty, get an idea for the game, because the last thing you want is to get stuck on a mission somewhere while you have a limited time to play the game. So I went with normal difficulty, and let me tell you something, which I found really, really surprising, and that is that normal difficulty is actually normal difficulty. It's not like a lot of open world games where normal difficulty is actually easy. Normal difficulty in this actually feels normal. Like if you take a cup one hit too many, you will fail the mission. You will die. And that was very refreshing. It's nice to see that, you know, they're not scared of actually throwing damage at you and actually downing you. As a matter of fact, I got downed quite a few times. More on that a little bit later. So let's talk about the combat. So the faceplate buttons on the DualShock 4 are going to be doing light attacks, heavy attacks, dodges, and jumps. So naturally, light attack is square, heavy attack is triangle, you got dodge and circle, and jump in X. You can also use R1 to shoot webs while in combat, and I believe that these controls will get increasingly complex as you develop your skill tree. But ultimately, you know, you got your light attacks. The light attacks are good for doing combos. Then you got a heavy attack. Now, the heavy attack is pretty cool in that it shoots out a web and then propels you towards an enemy. The heavy attack actually has a couple of different functions that you can do. So you can either propel yourself towards an enemy, like I just said, or you can actually pull the enemy off balance by keeping heavy attack pressed. I believe that as you go down the skill tree, there will also be skills to like disarm enemies. So for instance, if the enemy has a shield or something like that, you'll be able to disarm it using the heavy attack. And the other thing is that heavy attack can also be inputted in the middle of light attack combos to perform heavier attacks. You know, you can do your usual square, square, triangle, and it will go into like 2 attacks into a heavier attack with a kick or something like that. And the other cool thing is that if you hold down the light attack, your character will actually start like a juggle combo. So you'll do an uppercut, which will send enemies into the air. And then if you keep spamming square, your character jumps in after them, starts punching them while they're in the air, or you can shoot webs at them while you're in the air, that kind of stuff. And the cool thing is that while you're in the air, if you then hold down on the triangle button, you can actually perform like a slam attack with the enemy that is in the air by shooting webs at them, pulling them down, doing like the whole circle thing, and then slamming them on top of someone. I found that particular combo to be super satisfying. Like just juggle someone up in the air, punch them a couple of times, and then hold down heavy attack to slam them down on top of somebody else. Super, super satisfying. There's also the possibility that I've later seen in the B-roll to punch enemies into walls and then just like spam your web shooting attack to kind of like stick them in the wall. By the way, you can also stagger enemies by using the web shoot attack, because you can basically spam it on them and they will become stuck for a little bit. As a matter of fact, that is a mechanic for one of the boss fights that I did. And ultimately, there is also a really cool thing, which is you can press R1 and L1 in order to throw items that are in the world. So like, say, for instance, you're fighting a bunch of enemies and there's like a trash can or something. You hold down R1 and L1, Spidey will shoot out webs. He will start spinning the stuff around him and then throw it at people, which again can be used to break guard on enemies that have like items on them or something. Really, really satisfying. I cannot emphasize how satisfying the combat felt, because I know that some people might look at the gameplay and you guys might think, oh, it's the Batman Arkham combo, and when certain things happen, you do the counters. To me, it felt very different to that specific combat, because you're not really doing counters per se, you're actually dodging the enemies, because that's kind of like what you can do, at least at the very start. You're actually dodging, and depending on the skills that you have, it is going to change a little bit how you do the combat. But ultimately, I would say it's more about building the combos, which it's also something that you have on the Batman-like combat systems, but it's more about the building of combos themselves than necessarily doing counters, which to me, maybe that's a little bit more satisfying. Another really cool thing is that the dodge that you do is contextual. It's not just like your standard dodge, which will always be the same. So like, say for instance, I'm punching someone in the face and they're about to counter me and I just dodge. Spidey will actually slide down through the guy's legs, come up on the other side, and you can keep on punching. See, that kind of stuff, that kind of contextual animation is really, really cool. There's also the possibility for you to dodge into walls. And if you dodge into a wall, you can then press square in order to do like a wall attack. So again, a lot of contextual actions, from being able to throw stuff at them, from being able to even throw enemies against other enemies, and the contextual dodging. The combat felt super solid. And again, there's still like a skill tree thing that you will go down and you will be able to make it even more complex. Spidey also has is Spidey sense, which is going to warn you whenever someone's about to attack you. So just in case that, like, say your camera is facing a certain angle and you're focusing on an enemy and you can see Spidey sense on top of his head, you're just like, oh, someone's coming. You can instantly press dodge and dodge away. Like, Spidey is super agile and, again, really, really satisfying to play. I think that this is a really good portrayal of Spider-Man. It's not all about just taking all of your enemies head on. There's also the stealth gameplay mechanics, so you will be able to do a couple of stealth takedowns if you happen to find your enemies, not really looking at you. You'll be able to even pull them, like, say, if you're in a vent or something, you will be able to pull enemies up into that vent and then just instantly stick them on the top of the vent and they will be stuck there. Or you can, like, wrap them around in little spider cocoons throughout, if you're, like, on a ramparts or something on a building, you'll be able to, like, wrap them around in there and they'll just be stuck there completely disabled, which, again, also really, really satisfying. Now, on top of all of these things that you can do, there is a focus gauge that Spider-Man has. Now, this focus gauge at the level in the gameplay section that I played, there was only two things that you could really do with it, which was you could use it to heal Spider-Man, or you could use it to perform like a super special move that was like kind of like an instant takedown of an enemy. And basically the way it works is the more you hit enemies, the more the focus gauge builds. And if you get hit naturally, the focus gauge decreases and it doesn't build up as much. So this is how you actually heal yourself in the middle of combat. And it's a really good way to do it because basically if you're being successful, you'll be able to heal yourself more. If you're failing, you're not going to be able to use the healing mechanics to stay in the fight. So it actually forces you to learn how the combat system works and actually get decent at using the combat system in order to perform this. Now, naturally, the more gauge you have, the more it is going to heal your character, and only with a full gauge you can perform the takedown. And the takedown is usually some really fancy animation where Spidey just like picks somebody up, throws them down into the ground, or slides beneath them, and then does some crazy thing with webs and performs. It's a flashy takedown move that you can do. Now, there was a boss fight that I got to do. We got to fight Wilson Fisk, also known as the Kingpin, if I'm not mistaken. I don't follow comics all that much, so sorry if I'm mistaken there, but I'm pretty sure Wilson Fisk is the Kingpin. But you get to fight Wilson Fisk. The mechanic there is pretty simple. You basically have to web him up, and your web shoot attacks have like a cooldown, so you have to web him up a couple times and then wait for it to recharge so that you can web him up again. Whenever he's fully webbed up, you can actually go in and perform a couple of attacks on him. The first stage of that fight was fairly easy. The second stage became considerably more challenging because he placed a bunch of enemies in the middle of that. And that was actually something that I thought was a bit of a disadvantage there. Maybe it can be because it's just the first time that I'm playing, so I'm not super familiar with the combat just yet. But I had a little bit of trouble, like, picking which targets I actually wanted to attack. Like, a couple of times, I wanted to attack Wilson, and I would end up attacking one of his goons, whereas other times I would want to attack one of the goons, and I would end up attacking Wilson. Now, I think that with practice, that is something that can be worked on. And also, the place that I was at had like a massive sun glare on the screen, made it hard to see, and I'm coming up with every kind of excuse I have in order to admit to you guys that I actually failed. I think it was either 3 or 4 times. And that's why I said normal is actually normal. If you're not doing that great, the game will punish you and the game will be like, no, you failed, go back and try again. Having said that, the checkpoint was actually really, really nice because it didn't start me off at the very beginning of the fight. There was a checkpoint midway through the fight with Wilson Fisk. So, I basically was able to repeat the harder part of the fight, which to me is better than having to repeat the fight every single time from beginning to end. Kind of works a little bit better that way. That fight also involved a cinematic, which was really good. Like I said already in the video, the cinematics are looking pretty damn good. And that cinematic also had a couple of QuickTime events. And I know a lot of people are not really down for QuickTime events. And especially we saw a gameplay sequence a while back on one of the first showings of gameplay for Spider-Man. And that gameplay sequence actually showed like a really heavy QuickTime event. It was just like QuickTime after QuickTime after QuickTime. And that was insane. It was not nearly as heavy on the sequence that I did. I think it had like 3, maybe 4 quick times in a row. And the thing was, the quick time events were actually really easy. They were not punishing at all. So for instance, they showed which buttons I had to press with a lot of time for me to actually think, hey, it's almost like they showed the buttons and I'm like, okay, I guess I'll go get a coffee and then I can come back and press these buttons. That's how much time you have to respond to QuickTime. And the interesting thing is that I instantly press them, right? Because you see a QuickTime event, you see the buttons, and your first reaction is press it now. But it's actually one of those things where the circle closes in on it. Once the circle closes in all the way, then you press the button. But even if you press them too early, it didn't really punish me. So I'm not sure if that is intentional, if that's the way that it is going to be in the game. Because like to me, the second the buttons showed up, I would press them because my brain is like conditioned to do that in QuickTime events. And that was not the intent. The intent is like, okay, listen, this circle is going to go close down. Once the circle gets there, then you press the button. And, it felt very forgiving. I didn't fail a single one of them. So again, it felt extremely forgiving, the QuickTime events, and not a problem at all. It's not like I felt, oh, I got screwed over because I failed this QuickTime event. Never really happened. The only times I got screwed over is because I failed at mastering the combat at that point. So I've been talking about this skill tree, and for those of you that are more curious about the skill tree, what it's going to be like, I didn't get like a super in-depth look at it because I was focusing more on checking out the gameplay and actually playing the game rather than trying to memorize a skill tree, because it's not like I could take a picture of the skill tree, right? And it's not like I was going to spend like 1 hour typing down every single skill in the skill tree. So I tried getting an overall idea of each of the skill trees. There's 3 of them. There's 3 paths that you can go down, and then each of them is going to have different choices. The first one is called the Innovator, and this skill tree seems to be about throwing enemies around. So I think the first one enabled you to actually throw enemies around. This was not the skill that I put on my first skill point they allowed me to put, but it allowed you to like throw enemies around easier. So instead of you having to like throw them up in the air and then you can throw them around, I believe this allowed you to throw them around from the ground. And then from there, you would also start learning stuff like disarming enemies with using your heavy attack and whatnot. So that's the Innovator skill tree. The other skill tree is the Defender. This is the skill tree that I took because the very first skill was the perfect dodge. So basically, the Spidey sense will now at one point, I think it glows blue. So if you're able to dodge just as it is glowing blue, you do like a perfect dodge, which slows down time a little bit, but it doesn't like stay slowed down. It's just slow down time to indicate, hey, you did a really good dodge. And what you get for it is Spidey basically throws a web in the dude's face that was about to attack him, which is going to incapacitate that dude for a little bit. So you do a perfect dodge, you're basically going to get an opening on the enemy that just tried attacking you. So that's the Defender tree. I expect a lot more stuff around perfect dodges and stuff like that. And then you had the Web Slinger tree, which I didn't check any of the skills on that tree, but I'm assuming that it is about the navigation and potentially doing improvements on the way you navigate through the world, which is, again, really cool because navigation is a really cool part of that game. So now let's talk about something that I didn't really like as much, and that was the Peter Parker section, because you don't just play as Spider-Man. There will be parts of the game where you actually play as Peter Parker. Now, I'm not supposed to tell you guys a whole lot about this particular section because these are things that they didn't want us to talk about, some of the story elements in that section. But I can tell you about it mechanically, and what I can tell you is that I was super excited. I had just taken down Wilson Fisk and a lot of his goons, and I just came from stopping a couple of robberies and just like having a lot of fun. And the second I started playing as Peter Parker, it was almost like, hey guys, it's the fun train. Yeah, choo-choo, yeah. And then it's like, Peter Parker moment. Choo-choo, yeah. The game came to a screeching halt. And I don't know, maybe that's just me, but to me it's like, when the game is all about like super fast-paced action and just going on that wild ride of web slinging and doing all of these things. And I think that this is not going to be as prevalent in the final game because you'll be able to better choose when you go and engage on these Peter Parker scenes. So it's like maybe you will do as much web slinging as you want, and then you're like, okay, now let's go into a Peter Parker scene, experience some of the story, some of his life, and some of that stuff. And once you're able to actually control that, whereas in the setting that I was, it's like, oh, okay, I guess now is the time that they're guiding me to go do this Peter Parker thing. And it just felt, it's a very different type of gameplay, because when you're as Peter Parker, naturally, you're not Spider-Man, so you're doing other things. And Peter Parker's working on improving his suit. He's actually doing some other stuff that I can't really talk about, but essentially that also included a couple of puzzles that you had to solve. And it's almost like, I don't want to call it like a Tetris minigame, but it is like that kind of a minigame inside the game itself. As you are working through circuit boards and stuff, you're essentially putting these parts down and twisting them around and solving different puzzles going through that. And that, to me, was just not as much fun as the rest of the game. And I'm just concerned as to how prevalent those things are going to be, because I think that they can be a bit of a breath of a fresh air. Like, say you've just been web slinging for 2 hours or something, and now you're like, okay, I want to take a little bit of a break of that. Let's go do some of these puzzles, some of these side things. But again, that kind of generated a little bit of conflict in me, because I was just like, I was having so much more fun when I was being Spider-Man and doing the Spider-Man thing. So yeah, the Peter Parker section. Again, I think that once you're able to control when you do it, I think it'll be fine. But to me there, it felt like a really abrupt stop to the fun. It's like, hey, fun train, and I'll stop. And I was like, but I want to keep riding the fun train. Anyway, and the other thing is I could talk a little bit about the open world aspects of Spider-Man, because I did one of the story missions, and then I did a couple of side activities, which consisted of preventing a couple of robberies, saving an innocent woman who was getting mugged or assaulted or something. They were using her as a hostage for something, so I stopped them. And, there's that kind of activities of you basically fighting crime throughout the city. But there is the age-old Assassin's Creed tower mechanic, so to speak. You go up to these towers, you synthesize this frequency, and you fix the tower, and then it's like, hey, now there are all these other activities that you can see in the map. So it felt very much like the Assassin's Creed Towers mechanics, unlocked a whole bunch of activities, and there's also these backpacks that you can collect throughout the world, which will give you crafting materials to work on your suit, and upgrades and stuff like that. And yeah, that's what I've played of Spider-Man so far. My initial impressions is I really, really liked it, and I can't wait to actually play this game. Like, this is something that is usually not really in my wheelhouse, because I tend to play a whole lot of other kinds of games like the Monster Hunter likes and the Dark Souls likes and that kind of stuff. This is quite a bit different, but I also enjoy these open world games very much, like Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, and this is another one of those around Spider-Man, and it feels super solid. And I especially think that I'm not a huge Spider-Man fan. Like, sure, I like Spider-Man, but I think that there are a lot of people out there that are much bigger fans of Spider-Man. And I don't want to paint myself as like, oh, I'm a massive Spider-Man fan. No, I like Spider-Man. He's cool. But I think that the people who really like Spider-Man, you're really going to get a game that you're going to completely fall in love with. And that is just my straight up opinion of what I played so far. What do you guys think of the stuff that you've seen so far about Spider-Man? Let me know in the comment section below. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that you are notified whenever I put out my next video. Thank you very much for watching. Here's 2 video suggestions that you guys can go check out if you want to. Otherwise, once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.